thinking about creators as the equivalent of, having your own TV show that you are fully and completely in control of. You are the showrunner, you are the executive producer, you are everything. Social gives us the ability to do that. It does kind of force everybody to reconsider things that they thought they knew were true 10 years ago. It's different today.
Explore the minds and marketing strategies behind today's winning brands and businesses. Tap into the power of the creator economy with Earned by CreatorIQ. Here's Conor Begley.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Earned. Today, we've got Terrence Sweeney on the show. Welcome to the show, Terrence.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And for those that don't know Terrence, so Terrence has been a long-time CMO. He was actually CMO of the first company I worked at out of school, and is most recently CMO at Hintwater, but has spanned technology and all kinds of categories, telecom as CMO. So pumped to have this conversation.
It's nice to see you again. It's been a long time. I do remember you're walking around our offices at reputation.com with your headset on and selling our services hard.
Totally. Yeah, I think, was that the memory that you had of me at 22 years old?
Wandering around, selling hard. You've been a salesperson from the moment you got out of college, I guess.
Well, they say that's the most common path to being a CEO, right? So is being sales. So
yep. Clearly you were good at it.
It worked out well. Well, let's start with kind of this broad spectrum of experience that you've had. I mean, there's not many people that get to say they've been at venture-backed startups and, CPG companies and telecom and all this kind of stuff. What I'm curious about is for you, as you've learned marketing and really gotten to understand it in a really complex way, what are some of the core truths you found to be things that you rely on, things that you believe? Yeah, talk about that.
Well, I think, momentum, I think, is the most important thing in any organization. And I think from a marketer's point of view, when you're deciding that you want to go work for a brand or whether you're deciding whether to stay at it, momentum is just a key factor because it's that kind of magical pixie dust that determines when you're not doing anything, are you able to acquire or retain customers? And when that's not happening, you have to work much harder than when you're effectively sailing with the current. And so I think as a marketer, you're constantly assessing, do we have momentum right now or are we trying to create momentum? And you behave differently in those two situations. I think if you're trying to create momentum, you have to take more risks. Now, not every company is interested in taking risks, especially when they don't have momentum. The dollars are tight, revenue is not growing, profitability is not where you want it to be. And ironically, when you do have momentum, CFOs, CEOs, the board, they're much more willing to take risks on stuff because they feel like they can do anything and it's going to work. So it's sort of counterintuitive the way it tends to work. When you need the most risk-taking is when you have the least amount of momentum. So in my career, I've had the good fortune of working at some companies that have incredible momentum. It's almost riding a rocket ship, and you almost can't do anything wrong as a marketer. And then you take credit for the things that work great. But I've worked in some companies that had no momentum, and you were fighting hard against swimming hard against the tide, and that can tire you out. I think one of the reasons that you have pretty significant turnover at the CMO level is because you're often working in a company that just doesn't have the momentum. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Sometimes, companies, they're just more advanced in their life cycle, and it's just harder to be the fresh thing on the block when you've been around for a long time. So creating that momentum, I think, is a little bit easier in your life cycle. It's harder to do later in the life cycle. What goes hand in hand with momentum is the concept of virality. And I think, if you ask any marketer today, what are they looking for? Well, you're looking for virality. You want your marketing activities to kind of catch a life of their own, that you can put something out there and people are talking about it without you actually having to pay them to do it, without you having you to. And so, I've been, as a marketer, there's no question I've been asked more than how do we make this go viral? And it's the one answer you never have the answer to that because virality is serendipitous. But it is, I think there's a direct correlation to virality and momentum. So if you're operating in an environment with and a company that has momentum, it is much easier to kind of catch that viral moment because people are paying attention in a way that they don't normally pay attention to your brand.
It's like the way you talked about that just draws up. There's an example that is perfect in terms of illustrating this. So we actually had another Terrence on the podcast. He's the president of Stanley. He comes in, brand has no momentum, right? It's at 70 million in revenue. It's been at 70 million in revenue for a very long time. It comes in 10x the revenue over the next like 4 or 5 years, right? And we analyze this from a data perspective too, right? So they had a very viral moment. It was when the car burned down. The Stanley survives, right? And like this one's like, oh my God. And then they bought her a new car and it went crazy viral. And then we wrote about it. And that was actually how I got in touch with Terrence. But if you look at the data around this momentum thing, they had been building momentum over the prior couple years, right? They've been getting more and more conversation about the brand so that when it was there, it was wildfire, right? It hit because people were ready and they were excited to talk about the brand in the moment versus if it was a sleepy brand it was 2 or 3 years before that, it, wouldn't have had the same effect. So
you got to be ready. You got to be ready to take advantage of the moments that you do have. And you got to be really responsive, especially, today. You've got to have a high degree of sensitivity to what the market is telling you about your product, and you have to be willing to jump on top of those things and amplify those things wherever you can. Doesn't always work out, but that's why I think you've got to, a huge concept, I think, in marketing, these days is just experimentation. And if you're not dedicating resources to experimentation, then you are likely going to lose momentum. Eventually, you're going to lose momentum. So you need to be thinking about what's the next thing that's going to help increase my velocity, increase my momentum. And you have to be in that kind of experimental mode. I've worked for a lot of companies where, the organization is supportive of experimentation, but generally if you're judging performance based on what's the cost of acquisition, for instance, and you build that experimentation budget into the cost of acquisition, it often will throw it out of whack. And really what organizations should be doing is taking the money that they tend to think of as kind of established, proven investment and using that to calculate a cost of acquisition and a lifetime value. And they ought to be keeping separate from that an experimental budget so that they can incentivize their teams to constantly take risks, even if those things are going to fail. And so, again, you can double down on something that seems crazy, but those are the things that could actually lead to an explosive viral opportunity that then leads you down the path of this is how we're going to invest in this brand from now on. So, again, part of what I've tried to do at companies that I've worked in is to try to establish an experimental budget that doesn't count against your CPAs, but that incentivizes your team and gives your team the ability to feel comfortable about taking those risks without ruining their CPAs or whatever metrics they're using to determine success.
How do you think about measuring non-CPA driven activities like brand investments, these kinds of things? Because I know that when I thought about Hint, it always felt like it had a strong brand identity to me without really being able to explain what it was or why. So how did you think about both experimental activities on the brand side and investing in those kinds of activities?
Well, I think you got to know where you stand. Any dollars you're spending in kind of performance marketing, usually you get pretty decent feedback from that, so you know that. But, Meta, probably what it has done better than any other company in the history of the world is taking credit for sales and obviously an incredibly powerful platform. But what they were really good at is telling you that they were the reason that somebody bought your product. And so people invested more and more in that. Now, as attribution has gotten more sophisticated, now there are some tools out there where you suddenly discover, well, maybe this wasn't exactly Facebook. And building incremental tools that look more at incrementality. I'm spending money on Facebook and Instagram. How are those investments? How incremental are those investments versus what I would have gotten without it? So I think incrementality is a way, and different types of attribution marketing measurement are an important part of that. At Hint, we really didn't have any brand metrics at all. It was sort of a startup-y kind of company that just didn't measure brand in any way. So just establishing an attitude and awareness study where what do people think of it? How many people know it? What do they think of it? What does it stand for? Obviously you're doing tons of segmentation around who knows about it, who likes it, who doesn't like it. You're looking at net promoter scores, who recommends it, who doesn't recommend it. So when I got to the company, we started measuring those things, and suddenly it was like lighting up the room. You're like, oh my God, in some cases we're much worse off than we were. And then in other places we're like, oh my God, we have incredible strength here. So it isn't until you actually start measuring those things that you can really get a clear view of what's happening. And then once you see that, you can actually start making smart decisions about where you want to invest and the metrics that you think are going to move the business. I mean, for Hint, when I got there, one of the core measurements that anybody that's looking at brand strength is going to ask you is, aided and unaided awareness. It's just a basic, building block kind of measurement. And unaided awareness is when you ask somebody, name a flavored water in our case. Yeah. When I got to Hint, 2% of people named Hint. In answer to that question. And the company, it was 15 years old at that point. So, we looked at that and said, okay, well, that's not great, but that's an opportunity. It, can't go down. It really can only go up. And then aided awareness is the measurement around you show somebody an image of your brand and say, do you recognize this brand? And then the people that say yes, that's your aided awareness. In our case, we had 23% aided awareness. So even though we were in 20,000 stores, we'd spent tens of millions of dollars.
80% of the U.S. had no idea. Couldn't point you out. And be
they
like,
would say, I don't know what that brand is.
Yeah.
So, fast forward 5 years, as I was leaving the company, the metrics, we went from 2% to 29% unaided awareness. So 14 times improvement in 5 years. I mean, that doesn't happen to a lot of brands, especially brands that are, 15 plus years old. And it was the number one brand, recalled brand in the category. So we were businesses that were billion-dollar businesses. We were actually better known from an unaided brand awareness perspective. And that's because we just sort of insinuated ourselves into their lives, into the culture. We were just more top of mind because of the way we were marketing to people, and we were doing a better job than our competition, even though we were a smaller brand. And our aided awareness tripled during the time that I was at the company. So now we were competing with brands like Smart Water, which were, again, multi-billion-dollar brands, and we were just a much, multi-hundred-million-dollar brand. Yeah. So I think that, you don't need infinite amounts of money to do it. You can take brands that have been around a long time and you can turn things around. So the market is responsive. You just need to find ways to reach people and get people to pay attention. And I think, again, one of my philosophies in marketing is really a recognition that, consumers don't owe you anything. I mean, you can say whatever you want to say, and they have more tools today to ignore your message than they've ever had before. Swipe through it, flick through it, click through it, fast forward, whatever it is. There are better tools today to ignore advertising and marketing than ever before. So you have to give them a reason to do it. And I think engagement is that reason. You have to make your marketing message irresistible. You have to, make it so when you present it to somebody, they want to engage. And I think, switching over for a moment to influencer marketing, I mean, this is the secret sauce to influencer marketing. They have audiences, and they're good at creating content. That's how they built their influencer creator brand. And they are fundamentally engaging. They're engaging to a certain type of audience.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have an audience, right?
Exactly. And so they've built that audience, and they talk about a brand, and it matters. And so you get inside people's defenses. I tend to think of consumers as defending against the marketing message.
Ad blocking constantly.
That's
giving the Heisman.
And so I think that you got to get inside those defenses and get people to engage, even though their inclination is to try to ignore advertising. They don't want to. Consumers don't want to be. I think David Ogilvy said, "You can't bore people into buying your product," and I think that. He's a quote machine. But I mean, that's something that's always stuck with me, where creative matters and creators matter. Yeah. Where, you can put a price out there and you can have a product on sale, but ultimately you really getting people to pay attention to it requires them to put their guard down and absorb that message rather than just, sort of tune it out.
Yeah. I remember this stat, and I'll get the numbers wrong, but the general concept is there. It's like 80 whatever percent of consumers want their brands to be like funny, right? Like they want them to have humor. Yeah. And but it's like 15% of brands do, right? The vast majority don't. And it's like, and humor is a tough topic, right? Because to be humorous, you have to be kind of edgy a lot of the times. You have to
risky.
Risky.
You got to take risks. Being funny is not easy. Most people are not funny. So they aren't. So, and doing it professionally is hard. I think even creators, many creators are not funny. They're earnest. Their followers follow them because they're earnest, not because they tell jokes. But I think, definitely if you look at you just have to look at the Super Bowl to see what works And that is mostly humor is the thing that gets people to lower their guard and engage even when they don't want to. And so, I've worked on a lot of brands that have used humor, even back at reputation.com, which really was about, online reputation management, which seems to be about the most boring thing that you can imagine. But, we took kind of an indirect route to get there. We made, we sort of personified the internet in a way in the early days. I mean, this was, 15 years ago, and said the internet is not your friend. It doesn't care about you. And we did it in a humorous way, and that caused people to engage with the problem. And then the solution was there's a subscription service that you can have that, can help you manage, the unruliness of, the internet. And so the way in, you want a brand that is engaging. You want a brand that makes people pay attention. Not everybody can have a funny and humorous brand, but the work that you do, often a way in to get people to pay attention is through humor.
Yeah. It's funny. Just as you're talking about that, it's bringing back memories of that time. And, I'd tell people about what I did, and they'd be like, oh my God, I heard about you guys on the radio.
Yeah.
And it would be some funny ad. Like, you guys did a lot of humorous radio ads.
Yep.
And I totally forgot about that until you just started talking about it. I mean, I knew the radio thing, but I forgot about the kind of funny ad side of things. Talk to me a little bit about that. It's probably the only time on the show we've talked about radio, but I mean, there are an insane number of people that listen to radio, and it's like a really engaging medium. Obviously, podcasts are now an extension of that, right?
Yep.
That's another big channel that's emerging. And you're at a firm now, or you help out with a company that kind of focuses on that. What works in radio, and why should people do it? What kinds of brands should do it? What kind of brands shouldn't do it? Because a lot of these brands are not visual, right? But you're still having a good time with them.
Yeah, I mean, so audio. I tend to think of it as audio. Audio has been around for a century, so it is a medium where it doesn't have visuals, but it does. You can convey emotion in audio. And I think podcasting is a multi-billion-dollar industry right now, and it's all. I mean, it seems like. I mean, it's more digital than terrestrial radio is, but it's fundamentally about audio. And huge brands have been built inside podcasting. So you've got public radio, you've got terrestrial commercial radio, you've got satellite radio, streaming radio through smart speakers. And it's a massive ad platform that, frankly, in almost every case, I'd set podcasting aside, where a cost of impression, a CPM, cost of 1,000 impressions, is almost always costs less than any video that you were to buy.
Yeah.
So especially when you're kind of an earlier stage company and you just don't have as much money, but you still want to reach lots of people, audio is a great way, an efficient way to reach people. And if you do it the right way, you can get people to engage and you can get them to emote about your brand. So you can tell a story, you can create kind of a problem solution setup, and you can get people to engage with that. And podcasting, in my mind, is, it's sort of one of the best, certainly the best audio medium that you can work in. And it ultimately, I think of it as an influencer medium. I mean, the reason that podcasting exploded wasn't just because it was impressions that you could insert ads in. It was that hosts who had built audiences and built, an authentic relationship with audiences, infinite numbers of topics. But those hosts were then reading the ads live, and they were talking about products. Like, I use this product. They sent me a bunch of this product. So in a lot of ways, it's just like what we're doing with, kind of the social media influencer, sending people product. In this case, it's paid. You're paying them to promote your product, but it comes across as an authentic recommendation around that product. And so that, honestly, podcasting, there's great content, but the reason that podcasting is a multi-billion-dollar industry today is because it's a great ad platform. And there are a huge number of brands that have succeeded almost exclusively on podcasting. I mean, I don't think you would use it to the exclusion of video, because video is also such a powerful medium, but audio is very powerful, and it typically is more efficient than video has been, at least historically.
The weird thing about audio is, video, you have to be watching, right? You kind of have to be paying attention. Right? Whereas audio,
it's a multitasking.
Right? You're multitasking, you're doing other things, which also causes, at least for me personally, I would imagine a lot of people, to be less likely to skip through ads, right? You just kind of let it play in the background, the ads come, and you're just kind of there, but they can catch your attention.
Yep.
Versus video, I'm skipping it as fast as I can because I have to be so engaged.
My first job out of college was working for a big New York ad agency. and one of our biggest clients was General Mills cereals, and I worked on Cheerios, Trix, and Lucky Charms. We were using celebrity endorsers back then. I mean, this was a while ago. I'm older than you are. And then I was working with characters like Lucky the Leprechaun and the Trix Rabbit, who, when you really sort of dig down to it, they're influencers too. They were influencers for, 7-year-old kids.
Yeah.
But I think that being able to connect with somebody who is endorsing a brand, that's always been powerful in marketing. And social media has just fundamentally changed who can be an influencer. Now it's anybody. I mean, just like anybody can be. You have 2 listeners and suddenly you can be an influencer. And I think you don't even have to have listeners. You can actually, in a way, again, as a marketer, I think about brand ambassadors. Employees are brand ambassadors now because they have social media. So, as an employee, if you want to promote the company you work for, you can reach people. People have thousands of followers in their social networks. If you're an ex-employee, you can be negative about a brand. So so it can be the anti, people who apply for jobs at your company, they can be influencers. Like social media has essentially allowed every single person to be a brand influencer. And so, that's an opportunity. There's a dark side to that too. It does require that as a brand, you have to think about every single customer touch point because everybody is commenting, everybody can say something. But even take it to reviews, ratings and reviews. 100%. I mean, who doesn't go on to Yelp, who doesn't go on to Amazon and look at what either the broad star ratings are, or read a few reviews. And so suddenly you're just some person who doesn't have any friends, but you bought a product and you didn't like it and you wrote that it was the worst thing ever, or you thought it was the greatest thing ever. And 100,000 people might actually read that review and buy a product simply because you wrote such a great review. Yeah. So people consumers these days have incredible power. And it's not just they are all influencers. So, again, the way I tend to think about, marketing, it's really a kitchen sink approach these days. I mean, obviously you're limited by budget. You really need to think about every single channel that you can operate in, that you can afford to operate in, and you need to find the most efficient channels and not ignore channels that can have a real impact on your business. So I think marketing, I tell this anecdote to lots of people. When I came out of college, it was, in the 80s. I was working in marketing and advertising in New York City in the 90s. Every single medium and every channel that I worked in back then, you can still advertise in all those channels. They're still all available. Nothing has gone away. They still can do them all. There's just like 1,000 new ones that have been added on top of it. So, it's a lot more complex than it used to be. I think this is kind of the promise of generative AI and artificial intelligence that, with similar sized teams or slightly bigger teams, you'll be able to do more, a force multiplier. I tend to think of AI as force multiplication rather than how do we get rid of people, because teams are small to begin with.
Yeah, totally.
So how do you do more? How do you have kind of a kitchen sink approach? Do all this experimentation that we want to do to find those channels that are actually the highest performing and most efficient for you. And
then you triple down on those channels,
right? And then recognize that it's going to change. Another analogy that I have taken to is I think of marketing as kind of a jigsaw puzzle. And so, you've 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle and you're putting all this incredibly hard to figure out jigsaw puzzle, and then you're almost done with it, and then the image on it changes. That's what marketing is. So you got to take the puzzle apart, and then you got to put it back together again and create another image. It is just, it's regenerative. It's constant. It never stays the same. It's constantly changing. I think marketing, the reason I do it is because I think I have an incredible analytical approach to life, but I also have this very creative, wild side. And I like the melding of those two things, the art and the science of it. To me, that's what I want to do in my job every single day. You can be the key to success at a company, but you're often looked at as you're the problem as well. And so you got to be willing to take the arrows. And like I said, it's just constantly evolving. I find that to be exhilarating, the change to me. Not many people I know my age like TikTok as much as I do. I'm a personal fan of the platform, but I am just amazed as a as a communications platform, to me, it's just incredible, setting aside all of the, sort of Chinese ownership questions of it and whether it's going to survive. I think it's just an incredible platform for communication. And
it's just fun.
But also as an opportunity. I mean, again, for anybody who hasn't used the TikTok shop, I mean, that is the seamlessness of seeing an advertisement from an influencer with a link and a promotion, and you've purchased it within a minute or so of that. There's not too many experiences like that.
No.
So I think they've done an incredible job. And I know people who are, my contemporaries who have never been on TikTok before. So I think this is one of the things that I find exhilarating about, being in marketing is there's just constant, ever-evolving change, and it just makes the job interesting every day.
Yeah, I feel like the job of a CMO is very difficult. And as measured by tenure, right? Like the average tenure is, I think, 2 years, right? Like there's a lot of turnover. And it's like you see it when it's like, hey, why is this one ad like this? Or why does this one part of the website look like that? There's infinite surface area for criticism.
Yes.
And your performance is very much predicated on other people, right? Like, is the product good, right? What's the quality of the product? Are we releasing cool new products, right? Like that's going to drive a lot of things that are outside of your control. And then if it's in a more sales-driven environment, it's like you're handing off the leads to somebody else that has to then close them. Well, it's like, well, whose job? Like, oh, you're not sending me good enough leads, or why aren't the conversion rates high enough, or whatever. It's a very challenging job between those two, infinite surface area for criticism and a lot of lack of control over the end result as well.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard the line, everybody's a marketer.
Exactly,
and,
right?
It's true. There is no statement more true in business than everybody in the company is a marketer.
Yeah.
And which doesn't mean that people don't have great ideas.
No.
I think everybody truly can be, a marketer. I think probably the tough part for people in marketing is that there is no other area of the company that anybody would say, oh, I could be the head of finance. I could be the head of sales.
Yeah.
I could be an engineer. Nobody would say, I can do that. Marketing is the only thing where everybody says, I could do that. It seems so easy. But a big part of being a CMO for sure, but I think even, just sort of on the team in marketing, you're trying to build consensus inside the company. There is a lot of surface area, and you can get arrows, shot at you all the time. What I've learned over a career is you are trying to build consensus, outward, upward, and then even outside the company. I mean, investors, boards, you are trying to build consensus around and convince people that you know what you're doing, and that even if their instincts tell them something else, that you're giving them reasons to believe that what you're doing is the right thing. And look, sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, sometimes you can show a million different metrics, and still people will look at it and say, yeah, it still sucks. We are heading into, I think generative AI is giving us this opportunity. We're heading into probably the golden age of personalization and customization. I think we've been doing personalization in the industry for decades, but some of the front end work that we're doing with segmentation, that's been around for forever. So understanding how diverse consumers are, how their opinions are, that there's been a lot of data around that. There's now tons of data available about consumers so that you can then segment them and then target them through media. So that part of the industry has been around for a while, and it's even more sophisticated than that's ever been. What's been difficult is doing all the personalization on the creative front and then on the analytical front to figure out, like, how did each one of those many versions that you created, how did they perform, and then how do you optimize those, because you can't assume that all of them are going to work.
Yeah.
And so we're now, I think, headed into this environment where with relatively lean teams, you can actually do a lot of personalization and then analyze and optimize all that personalized work. So I think, marketers should be really excited about that. I think we're still figuring out generative AI, and I think there's probably too many people right now that are still thinking about how to use it as a way to get rid of people, to lose headcount, rather than thinking how do we make everybody better through the use of that. But I feel like there's huge opportunity.
100%. I think the way I think about personalization is you have the kind of personalization on the content and the ad side. But the other thing I think that makes the internet special is I can be in my pajamas in Lafayette, communicating with my consumer who's, in Nashville, Tennessee, in a direct one-to-one kind of human connection in a way that you just never could before, right? You were always disconnected from your audience, especially if you were distributed through retail, like Hint was. And so, yeah, it's this weird both between the new kind of generative AI stuff, ads, plus just the ability to like, hey, this person followed me, they commented, I'm interacting with them. That's building a real human connection. It's just a bevy of tools that hasn't been around, and it's really cool.
Well, and I think, what part of what's challenging about LLMs and generative AI is that the algorithms are they're opaque. So you can't really quite understand how it is that they work. So they're, probably one of the most significant aspects of them is the belief that they're giving you good data. You have to believe that they're actually working. It's going to take a little while to convince, people that we're not doing things that are, we can't understand what the true implications of them are. But the potential is really just amazing. And that as a marketer, you don't have to understand everything about how it's working. I mean, Facebook and Google have had AI built into their targeting tools for, many, many years now. And so there is a black box of how am I getting such a good CPA on this? Well, I have no clue. Does Google have any idea? Does Facebook have any idea? No, they don't. There's not a human that does, but there is an algorithm that actually does that. So I think we're going to get better and better at using those tools, and we're going to hopefully build more and more trust in them.
Yeah, I'm curious from your perspective. You've done both technology and consumer. Which do you think's harder from a marketing perspective?
I've been mostly a consumer marketer in my career. I mean, consumers are fickle. They don't want to pay attention. I mean, when you think about kind of a B2B business or even going to SMB, the messages you're getting from businesses, they're trying to help you succeed at your business. So I think if you're being a good business owner, even if you're a sole proprietor or whether you're a big company, it's incumbent upon you to sort of know what's out there. So you will consume advertising and say, maybe these guys are worth talking to. Consumers do not have that. So consumers, you're, like I said, you're trying to get inside their defenses. And so I would say generally it's probably, and because of their fickleness, I think it's harder to get them to pay attention. Maybe on the business side of things, there's a lot of sameness, and so maybe it's hard to differentiate. So you get people ignore you, or you have long-term contracts as an example. I mean, consumer. I mean, having worked in the beverage industry, what brands people consume, and even people that would go into who are subscribers of Hint, who spend hundreds of dollars a month on Hint every month. Hint is not the only drink they consume. They consume 10 other beverages over the course of a month. So consumers are insanely fickle in what they do, and it's very hard to get loyalty. Whereas I think in the business context, you can do a 3-year contract with somebody, and you don't have to worry about, they're not going to switch at this point because they're contractually obligated. So I think that's how I think about that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, one kind of last fun, or not fun, but end of show question I thought was interesting was, when I do these interviews, I try to spend a good amount of time prepping, reading interviews, podcasts, this kind of stuff. And, you've been a CMO at some pretty prominent companies, including Hint. When you're at Reputation, that was a very large venture-backed company, or fast-growing venture-backed company. But you're not as out there as some of the other CMOs I've met. I know that we talked about it before we were on, about you wanting to be more active there. Do you think of yourself as more of a behind-the-scenes CMO or a front of the crowd CMO? How do you think about spending your time, maybe is the better question?
Well, look, I think that as we were saying before is operative. I think social has fundamentally changed what you can do easily.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
I came up in an era where, if you were public through the media. So television, newspapers, magazines. And, mostly the strategy that we had in communications was you really had to have a single person be the face of your company. You didn't want to confuse the audience out there. And usually that's going to be your founder, your CEO. And so I've always been more of a kind of consigliere, than the face of it. And part of that, just has to do with both what the business demands and frankly what, the CEO and others, their expectations were. At Hint, we had a very prominent founder and CEO, and she was in the media all the time. The media liked dealing with her. And so being out there as a CMO didn't make as much sense for the business. It probably makes more sense for me as an individual when you think about building your, building your audience. But I think that's the fundamental thing that's changed about social media is that I do think, and then somebody's been, around the block, it's hard to think of your career in that way as I need to be more public.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just build a great book of business and a great looking resume and have had success throughout. It really is doing things like this where you're actually actively getting out there and just talking about your ideas and your experiences and having that help you in whatever it is that you want to do with your career.
Yeah. Well, and I think honestly, to your point about social media, I think what it's allowed too is you can have more than one face about different areas of your business, right? So like when I think of like HubSpot as an example, they've got Brian Halligan, who's like the founder, CEO or co-founder CEO. You've got Dharmesh, who's like the co-founder CTO, right? And they're speaking to different audiences. This is speaking to more of the tech forward side. This is speaking more to the marketing side. And so I still think you don't want to confuse people. You don't want to have 10 people, but I do think you can have these kind of specialized voices.
Yeah.
And to your point, I think that, outside of the impact that it has to the business, the audience you build and the credibility you build follows you, right? And so now it's a balance, right? How much of your time is spent building your own personal brand versus building a brand that it's integrated with where you work is a challenge, right? But
well,
yeah.
and I also think that, as I was saying before, I mean, a big part of, being part of a senior leadership team is recruitment and
totally.
retention. And so the more public you are, I suppose you can be judged positively or negatively, but I think that if you're doing things that are improving how you look publicly, then, honestly, that should help you recruit more easily. It should have a positive impact in areas that, again, 20 years ago, you didn't really have to think about those kinds of things. So I think that you and I were talking about this with respect to CreatorIQ and just the way that influencers today, there's obviously a paid component, but thinking about creators as the equivalent of, having your own TV show or having your own magazine that you are fully and completely in control of. You are the showrunner. You are the executive producer. You are everything. Social gives us the ability to do that in a way. Every single human can do the exact same thing. So it just, as you're kind of talking about it does kind of force everybody to reconsider things that they thought they knew were true 10 years ago. It's different today. There's opportunity that you really should be taking advantage of, getting out there more and kind of establishing yourself in a more public fashion, I think makes tons of sense. Unless you're ready to retire and sort of, go kick up your heels on the beach and, and just watch the sunset and get off social media and get off technology.
Not there yet. There yet.
No, nor am I.
Yeah, I think the one of the more misunderstood concepts when it comes to kind of the creator and influencer world is like, I've got a podcast, I create content on LinkedIn, I haven't generated a single direct dollar of revenue to myself through that, right? Maybe there's been some indirect revenue driven to the business and whatever, but like, it's not meant to be.
You could sell products.
I know.
Is there any products that you really
Well, the best product to sell is CreatorIQ, right? Like, because that's worth so much more to
I have
us.
people on TikTok trying to sell me handheld chainsaws all the time. I don't know what it is about handheld chainsaws that.
But yeah, there's I think this wave of the kind of non-professional creator where like creating isn't your day job, right? But creating content facilitates your day job. It's just a really big deal, right? Like whether it could be a car dealership that's breaking down the latest features in whatever GMC model, XYZ.
Well, my wife is a teacher, and she's been a teacher for a long time, and I'm always telling her, I'm like, you could create a really awesome channel. She comes home from she teaches elementary school science, and she comes home regularly with just hilarious stories of her students, what they say, what they do, what they don't do, and I'm like, this would be entertaining if you just jump onto TikTok and record this story. And she's like, "Oh my God, I can't do that. I'm a middle-aged teacher. I'm not going to do that." But the potential for this is one of the reasons why I think young people today. I can't remember which. I think there's multiple polls that I've seen that have said what is the most desirable job for kids in high school and college, and right now it's social media influencer.
It's crazy.
Seeing some of the way people can actually maintain a certain kind of lifestyle doing that, even when they don't have huge audiences, I can see why people feel that. I think if I were in high school or college right now, I'd be thinking the same thing. What can I do, to do that rather than to schlep into an office every day?
Totally. Yeah. Well, Terrence, I really appreciate you taking out the time. This was fun to
Yeah.
reconnect.
Yeah, it was
and
awesome. Appreciate
excited to have you as a part of it, and appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Awesome.
Be a friend, tell a friend, and subscribe. Earned by CreatorIQ. CreatorIQ is your all-in-one solution to grow, manage, scale, and measure your influencer marketing program. Ready to unlock the power of the creator economy? Get started with a demo today at CreatorIQ.com.